In the heart of the forgotten village of Umuiz, where the red dust clings to everything like a stubborn memory, lived a man named Obi. Obi was a quiet laborer with hands as rough as tree bark and a heart heavy with a secret shame. He was illiterate. In the bustling marketplace, the clever traders moved their tongues like lightning, weaving numbers and words that Obi could not grasp. One afternoon, a greedy merchant tricked Obi into signing a piece of paper with a thumbprint of charcoal. That simple mark cost Obi his entire month's wages. The crowd gathered, pointing fingers and laughing. "Look at the giant who cannot read a common sign," they mocked. Obi stood frozen, his head bowed, the sting of tears burning his eyes. But suddenly the laughter died down. A young woman named Nneka stepped forward from the shadows of the palm trees. Her voice was like a clear bell in the afternoon heat. "Shame on all of you," she cried, standing tall beside the broken man. She took Obi by the hand and publicly defended his dignity, shocking the elders and the gossips alike. That very night, against the fierce warnings of her wealthy family, Nneka declared she would marry Obi. Everyone whispered that she was tying her bright future to a man the world called useless. Their married life began in a small, leaking hut at the edge of the forest, far from the judgmental eyes of the village. While others slept, Nneka lit a single, flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows against the mud walls. She did not bring gold to the marriage. She brought something far more precious. With a piece of charred wood and broken roofing slates, she sat Obi down every night. "This is Obi. It looks like the mountain we climb," she would whisper, her voice full of patience. Obi's thick fingers fumbled with the charcoal, breaking it again and again. He felt like an old dog trying to learn a bird's song. Frustration boiled in his chest, and one night, he threw the slate across the room. "I am a laborer, Nneka. My brain is made of stone," he groaned, hiding his face in his rough palms. Nneka did not yell. She simply retrieved the slate, wiped it clean with her wrapper, and placed it back before him. She sacrificed her own portions of food to buy more candles and spent her days working extra hours in the fields so Obi could study. One rainy midnight, after months of struggle, Obi slowly traced the letters on a scrap of newspaper. He read a full sentence aloud. The silence that followed was electric. Something shifted deep inside his soul. The transformation in Obi was subtle at first, like the slow ripening of a mango. A few weeks later, he returned to the same marketplace where he had once been humiliated. The greedy merchant tried to pull the same trick, sliding a lopsided contract across the wooden table. Obi did not reach for the charcoal to thumbprint it. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, scanned the lines of ink, and pointed to a hidden clause. "You said the price was 10 coins, but here you have written 5, Obi said firmly. The merchant's face turned the color of ash as the surrounding traders gasped in surprise. For the first time in his 30 years, people looked at Obi not with pity, but with genuine respect. He felt a rush of adrenaline that was more intoxicating than palm wine. He realized right then that knowledge was not just letters on a page. It was a shield and a sword. He looked at his calloused hands and then at the distant horizon where the sun set over the great city. He was no longer content with the small boundaries of Umuiz. He saw a world where men with silver tongues ruled over men with strong backs, and he hungered to be among the rulers. The village was now too small for the fire Nneka had lit. Obi became a man possessed by ambition. He sat Nneka down by the hearth, his eyes glowing with a restless light. "I must go to the city, Nneka. There, a man who can read and write can become a king. I will build a mansion for you," he promised. Nneka looked at the small home they had built with love, but she saw the hunger in his heart. Without a word of protest, she went to her wooden chest and pulled out her only inheritance, a pair of gold earrings passed down from her grandmother. She sold them the next morning to fund his journey. At the village gates, the air was cool and the birds were beginning their morning songs. Obi carried a small bundle of clothes and the notebooks Nneka had painstakingly corrected. He looked at his wife, who stood small and hopeful against the backdrop of the dusty road. He felt a brief, sharp pang of hesitation, a feeling that if he stepped past the gates, the Obi she knew would vanish forever. But the call of the city was louder than the beating of his heart. He turned away and began the long walk toward the shimmering towers of the distant capital. He did not look back, not even when the village sounds faded into silence. The city was a sprawling, iron beast that breathed smoke and noise. Obi arrived with dusty sandals and a heart full of hope, but the streets were paved with indifference. He faced immediate rejection. The big offices laughed at his village clothes and his simple way of speaking. He spent his first few nights sleeping under a bridge, clutching his notebooks to his chest to keep them from thieves. Hunger became his constant companion, gnawing at his stomach like a wild animal. Yet, every time he felt like crawling back to Umui's, he remembered the letters Nneka taught him. He used his literacy to land a job as a low-level delivery clerk for a shipping firm. He worked harder than anyone else, reading every invoice and manifest twice. One afternoon, a heated dispute broke out on the loading docks. A wealthy businessman was shouting at the manager about a missing shipment of expensive silk. The records were a mess of scribbles that no one could decipher. Obi stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He asked to see the ledger. With calm precision, he identified a mathematical error and traced the missing goods to a different warehouse. The businessman, a stern man with a silver-topped cane, stopped shouting. He looked at Obi with newfound interest, seeing a sharp mind hidden behind a laborer's shirt. The wealthy businessman, whose name was Chief Abodo, called Obi into his private office the following day. The room smelled of expensive leather and imported tobacco. "You have a gift for clarity, young man," the chief said, puffing on a cigar. "I need someone I can trust, someone who can see what others miss. I will mentor you, but I demand total loyalty. My world has no room for the baggage of the past." Obi felt the weight of the chief's gaze. It was the opportunity he had prayed for, the golden ladder to the life Nneka had dreamed for him. But then, the chief asked the question that changed everything. "Do you have any ties? A family? A wife in the village who will pull you back just as you begin to fly?" Obi's mind raced. He thought of Nneka in her faded wrapper, her hands stained with charcoal. He looked at the polished mahogany desk and the glittering city skyline through the window. He felt a cold shiver of shame. He feared that admitting he was married to a village girl would make him look small and provincial in the chief's eyes. "No, sir," Obi lied, his voice barely a whisper. "I am alone. I have no one but my ambitions." The chief smiled and offered his hand. Back in the village, the seasons changed, but Nneka's devotion did not waver. She sat by the candlelight every evening, writing long, beautiful letters to her husband. She told him about the harvest, the new calf, and how much she missed the sound of his laughter. She walked miles to the post office in the next town, but she had no address to send them to. Obi had sent no word, no map to his new life. She kept the letters in a silken bundle, believing in her heart that he was simply too busy building their future. In the city, Obi was indeed busy. He was learning the language of the elite, the way they moved, and the way they manipulated power. He began to ignore the thoughts of the dusty village and the woman who had given him his voice. He told himself that he was doing this for her, but the lie was becoming a comfortable skin. One evening, at a high society garden party hosted by Chief Abodo, a woman named Vanessa entered the scene. She was the chief's daughter, elegant and dressed in silks that shimmered like a serpent's scales. She looked at Obi and saw a man with potential, a rough diamond she could polish into a powerful ally. Obi was no longer the man who tripped over his words in the marketplace. Under the chief's guidance, he underwent a complete rebranding. He was given a new wardrobe of Italian suits, a sleek car, and a sophisticated way of speaking that erased his rural accent. He even changed his name to Obi Sterling, a name that sounded like money and authority. His past was now a dark secret buried under layers of luxury. One lonely night, he found the very first letter Nneka had ever written to him. A simple note she had tucked into his bundle when he left the village. It was stained with charcoal and smelled of wood smoke. As he looked at her neat, round handwriting, the very letters she had sacrificed everything to teach him, he felt a wave of nausea. He realized that as long as this letter existed, the O.B. Sterling identity was a fraud. He walked to the marble fireplace in his new apartment. With trembling hands, he watched the flames lick the paper. The charcoal letters curled and turned to gray ash. He told himself he was burning the bridge to his poverty. But in reality, he was burning the only heart that truly knew him. He was now a man of the city, built on a foundation of smoke. O.B.'s rise was the talk of the city's social circles. He moved through grand ballrooms with the grace of a panther, his intellect shining during complex business negotiations. He was no longer just a clerk. He was Chief Obodo's right-hand man. At a massive gala held to celebrate a new government contract, O.B. stood at the center of a circle of ministers and tycoons. They hung on his every word, admiring his sharp wit and his seemingly innate understanding of commerce. Vanessa moved closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She was the most sought-after bachelorette in the city, and her interest in O.B. made him the envy of every man in the room. "You are a mystery, O.B.," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "Most men here are built by their fathers' names or their family's gold. But you seem to have emerged from the air itself perfect and polished. Tell me the truth, because I hate secrets. Who made you who you are today? Who gave you the tools to stand among us?" The music seemed to stop in O.B.'s ears. For a second, he saw Nneka's face in the candlelight. But the hunger for status was a biting cold. "I made myself," he said, projecting his voice for the crowd. "I am a self-made man." The lie was met with a round of enthusiastic applause. To the city elite, the story of a self-made man was the ultimate romantic ideal. It earned O.B. more than just admiration. It earned him the trust of investors who saw him as a symbol of pure, unadulterated merit. His bank account swelled, and his influence reached into the high halls of government. He was a success story, a beacon of hope for the ambitious. However, news travels in strange ways, even across the vast distances between the city and the bush. Back in Umuiz, a traveler returned with stories of a great man in the capital who looked exactly like the laborer who had disappeared years ago. The traveler spoke of O.B. Sterling and his incredible wealth. Nneka listened to these stories with a heavy heart. She knew her O.B. was alive, but she didn't recognize the man being described. She felt a cold dread that the city had swallowed the man she loved. She packed a small bag, taking only her silken bundle of letters and the copies of the lessons she had once prepared for him. She decided to go to the city to find the truth, unaware that her presence was the one thing her husband feared most in the world. In the city, the pressure on O.B. was mounting. Chief Obodo called him into a private study, where a legal document sat on the desk. "You have proven yourself, O.B. I am ready to make you a full partner in Obodo Holdings. But more than that, I want you to officially join our family. Vanessa wants to marry you, and I approve." This was the pinnacle. Marriage to Vanessa meant becoming royalty in the city. It meant a life where he would never have to worry about the red dust of the village again. But it also meant a permanent commitment to the lie. He would have to live every day knowing his true wife was out there somewhere, a ghost of his former life. The chief pushed a pen toward him. "Sign this partnership agreement, and we will announce the engagement tonight at the National Gala. It is time to leave your old self behind forever." O.B. looked at the pen. It felt heavier than the tools he had used as a laborer. He thought of the village, the leaking hut, and the woman who had sold her gold so he could have this very pen in his hand. But the glitter of the city was blinding. He reached out, his fingers steady, and signed his name with a flourish. He had made his choice. The National Gala was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. O.B. stood on the stage beside Vanessa, the lights reflecting off his polished watch. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the hall swung open. A woman entered, looking out of place in her simple cotton wrapper and dusty sandals. It was Nneka. She had walked across the city to find the place where the great man was being honored. The security guards tried to stop her, but she pushed past them, her eyes locked on the man on the stage. "O.B.," she called out, her voice cracking with a mixture of relief and pain. The music died, 1,000 pairs of eyes turned toward her, then back to Obi. Vanessa gripped his arm, her face twisting in confusion. Obi, who is this common woman? Why is she calling you that name? Obi felt the world spinning. He saw Nneka's hopeful face, the woman who had taught him his first A. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the elite. If he acknowledged her, his empire would crumble in an instant. He looked straight through her, his heart turning to ice. I have never seen this woman in my life, he said loudly. She must be a deranged beggar. Guards, remove her immediately. Nneka's face did not just break. It shattered. She said nothing. She let the guards lead her away, her eyes never leaving his until she disappeared into the dark. The gala continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The engagement was officially announced, and Obi was toasted as the new Prince of Commerce. Society celebrated him, yet a small, poisonous seed of doubt had been planted. In the corners of the room, whispers began to circulate. People wondered why a deranged beggar would travel so far just to call out a specific name. Among the crowd was a retired teacher from a neighboring village near Umuiz. He recognized Nneka's face, and he knew the story of the illiterate laborer who had married a girl from a wealthy family. He didn't speak up immediately, but he began to ask quiet questions. Obi tried to drown his guilt in expensive champagne, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look of utter betrayal on Nneka's face. He told himself it was a necessary sacrifice for their ultimate good, but he knew he was lying. He was now engaged to a woman who loved his suit and his status, while he had just discarded the only person who had loved his soul. He retreated to his penthouse, but the silence of the city felt louder than any scream. He was at the top of the world, but he had never felt more alone. Nneka did not cry as she left the city. She walked back toward the village, her steps heavy but her mind strangely clear. The heartbreak had burned away the last of her naivety. When she arrived back at her small hut in Umuiz, she was no longer the soft, hopeful girl who had waited by the candlelight. She was focused and determined. She realized that by teaching Obi to read and write, she had given him a weapon he had used against her. But she also realized that she still held the master key. She went to her wooden chest and pulled out the old notebooks. She had kept copies of every lesson, every contract he had signed in the early days, and the original documents from her own family's estate that she had used to support him. She began to study the laws of the land herself, using the very literacy she had once shared. She realized she had a sharp mind for business that she had suppressed to let Obi shine. She began to reach out to her estranged family, using her knowledge to help them recover lost lands and settle old disputes. Slowly, quietly, Nneka began to build her own circle of influence, far away from the glittering lies of the city. In the city, Obi's success seemed unstoppable. He signed major deals that reshaped the skyline and gained influence in the highest circles of power. He was praised in newspapers as a visionary. He and Vanessa were the ultimate power couple, their faces plastered on every magazine. However, Obi's ambition had made him arrogant. He began to believe his own lie of being self-made. He signed documents without the same careful scrutiny he had once used. In one massive deal with Chief Obodo, a partnership that would merge their empires, he missed a series of complex legal traps hidden in the fine print. He didn't realize that the chief was not just a mentor, but a predator who had seen Obi's lack of true heritage as a weakness to be exploited. Hidden deep within the merger contract was a character and origin clause. It stated that if any part of the partner's public history was found to be fraudulent, all assets would automatically revert to the senior partner, Chief Obodo. Obi, blinded by his own reflection, signed the document with the same flourish he had used months before. He thought he was reaching the peak, but he had just stepped onto a trapdoor. The day of the Great City Jubilee arrived, and Obi was chosen to be the keynote speaker. It was a massive public ceremony held in the central square, attended by thousands. His story of rising from nothing was meant to inspire the youth of the nation. He stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces. He spoke eloquently about hard work, intelligence, and the power of the individual. I stand here as proof that you do not need a village to raise a man, "You only need a man who believes in himself," he declared. The crowd roared with approval. From the very back of the square, hidden under a simple shawl, Nneka watched him. She didn't shout. She didn't try to interrupt. She simply watched the man she had built use his voice to erase her existence one last time. She saw the pride in his eyes and the hollowness in his words. Beside her stood the retired teacher and a lawyer she had hired from her family's restored wealth. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there for the truth. She held a folder containing the original charcoal-stained slates and the marriage certificate Obi had tried to pretend didn't exist. The self-made man was about to find out that a building without a foundation cannot withstand the wind. The weeks leading up to the high society wedding were a whirlwind of luxury. Designers flew in from Europe to fit Obi for his suit, and the guest list included the president himself. Wealth, power, and admiration. Obi had it all. He felt like a god. But the first crack appeared during a final board meeting at Abodo Holdings. A minor disgruntled clerk, who had been fired by Obi for a small mistake, had found the records of Obi's original job application. The clerk noticed the inconsistencies in Obi's background and began to leak information to a rival journalist. Suddenly, the contract clause Obi had signed was triggered. A formal investigation into Obi Sterling's background was launched by the chief's own legal team. They weren't looking to protect him. They were looking for a reason to take his shares. Obi began to feel the walls closing in. He realized that the very people who had lifted him up, the chief and Vanessa, were the first ones to sharpen their knives when they sensed a lie. He tried to protest, to claim he was being framed, but the chief simply reminded him, "We made you, Obi, and we can unmake you just as easily." The investigation moved with terrifying speed. The rival journalist traveled to the village of Umuiz and found the marketplace where the illiterate laborer had once worked. He found the merchant who had been outsmarted and the neighbors who remembered the wedding. The story began to unravel like a cheap sweater. Back in the city, Obi's world was falling apart. His phone stopped ringing, and his friends in high society suddenly developed amnesia regarding his name. He realized with a sickening jolt that he had signed away control of his business. When he tried to enter his office, the security guards, the same ones who used to bow to him, blocked his path. "You are no longer authorized to be here, Mr. Obi," they said, using his real name with a sneer. He went to Vanessa, hoping for support, but she looked at him with cold disgust. "My father told me you were a fraud, but I didn't want to believe a village boy could be so bold," she said, tossing her engagement ring onto the floor. "The wedding is off. You are nothing but a lie in an expensive suit." Obi was left standing in the rain, the same way he had arrived in the city years ago. The scandal was the lead story in every newspaper. The self-made king was revealed to be a village fraud. Rumors spread like wildfire, each one more exaggerated than the last. Investors pulled their money, and the government contracts were canceled. Obi's reputation was under a heavy fire that he couldn't extinguish. He was a pariah. Then, a mysterious letter surfaced. It wasn't written by a journalist or a lawyer. It was a copy of the very first letter Nneka had written to him, the one he thought he had burned. It had been leaked to the press by someone who had seen Nneka's silken bundle. The letter was so full of love, so full of the truth of how she had taught him to read, that it touched the heart of the entire city. The public's mockery turned into a different kind of outrage. They weren't just angry that he had lied about his past. They were disgusted that he had betrayed the woman who had given him his future. The very letters Nneka had used to build his mind were now the evidence of his moral bankruptcy. Obi realized that he could no longer hide. The truth was out, and it had Nneka's handwriting all over it. The final blow came at a public marketplace gathering, similar to the one where Obi's journey had begun. The city elders and the press had gathered to hear a final statement from Chief Abodo regarding the takeover of Obi's assets. But before the chief could speak, a group of witnesses from Umuiz stepped forward. They were led by the retired teacher and the merchant. They told the crowd the true story of peace and Nneka. They described the nights of candlelight and the sacrifice of the gold earrings. The crowd, which had once praised Obi's intelligence, now saw it as a stolen gift. Then the most unexpected witness appeared. It was the lawyer Nneka had hired. He presented the documents proving that Nneka had been the true silent partner in all of Obi's early successes, providing the strategy and the moral support that he had claimed as his own. The praise became a deafening roar of outrage. People began to throw their newspapers at the stage. Obi stood in the center of the chaos, his expensive suit now looking like a costume. He looked for a friendly face, but he found only mirrors of his own betrayal. He had lost the city, and he had already lost his home. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Vanessa left the country, and Chief Abodo successfully seized all of Obi's bank accounts and properties, using the fraud clause Obi had signed. He was stripped of his titles, his cars, and his dignity. Within 48 hours, he was back on the streets, wearing the same clothes he had arrived in. He had nothing left but the small bundle he had carried years ago. He realized that the city was a place that loved the mask but hated the man. With no other place to go, he began the long, shameful walk back to the village of Umuiz. He walked through the same gates where he had once refused to look back. The red dust of the road covered his shoes, and the heat of the sun felt like a judgment. He expected to find a village that would laugh at him, a place where he could hide in the shadows of his old life. But when he reached the center of the village, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The small, leaking hut was gone. In its place stood a beautiful, sturdy house made of stone, surrounded by a lush garden. Obi stood before the stone house, trembling. He expected Nneka to come out in her old, faded wrapper, perhaps with tears in her eyes, ready to forgive him. But the woman who stepped onto the porch was not the girl he had left behind. Nneka was dressed in rich, vibrant fabric, her hair braided with gold beads. She looked strong, radiant, and deeply respected. Around her were several village women who were learning to read from slates she held. She had used her family's restored wealth and her own sharp business mind to build a school and a cooperative for the village women. She had become a leader in her own right, a woman of substance who didn't need a husband to give her a name. Obi fell to his knees in the dirt, the red dust staining his knees. "Nneka, I am sorry," he sobbed, his voice broken. "I lost everything. I was a fool who thought the shadow was the tree. Please, let me come home." Nneka looked down at him, her eyes calm and unreadable. She didn't look at him with anger, which was almost worse. She looked at him with the detachment one has for a stranger. "You didn't lose everything, Obi," she said softly. "You threw it away. This house is not your home. I built this with the strength you tried to deny." Nneka walked down the steps and stood before the man who had once been her world. "You want to know the truth, Obi? While you were busy pretending to be a king in the city, I was actually becoming one here. I didn't just teach you how to read. I taught myself how to lead. I used the very knowledge I gave you to protect our village from the same greedy merchants who once tricked you." She revealed her secret. She had quietly become an investor in the very city firms Obi thought he controlled. She had seen the traps the chief was setting and had ensured that when Obi fell, the village's interests remained safe. She held the real power now, the power of truth and the power of a clear conscience. "I kept the letters you never read," she said, holding up the silken bundle. "They were my strength. But now, they are just paper." She realized that she had outgrown the man she had sacrificed for. She was no longer the woman who married shame. She was the woman who had conquered it. Obi looked at her and realized that the gift of literacy she had given him was nothing compared to the gift of character she had kept for herself. Obi stayed in the village, but he lived in a small hut at the edge of the woods, working as a simple laborer once again. He spent his days in reflection, realizing the depth of his betrayal. One evening, he approached Nneka as she was finishing a class with the village children. He didn't come with excuses or lies. He came with a small wooden box. "I have nothing left of the city, Nneka," he said, his voice steady. "But I have this." He opened the box to reveal a beautifully carved wooden slate, polished until it shone like glass. On it, he had painstakingly carved a long public confession. He had written the names of every person he had lied to, every secret he had kept, and most importantly, a full, glowing tribute to the woman who had truly made him. "This is my gift to you," he said. "It is not wealth or gold. It is the truth. I will stand in the marketplace tomorrow and read this aloud to everyone, from the elders to the children. I will restore your honor before the world, even if it means I am mocked forever. I give you back your name, and I take my shame as my own." Nneka looked at the slate, then at the man who had finally learned the most important lesson of all. The next day, the marketplace was packed. Obi stood on a wooden crate, the same place where he had once been humiliated. With a clear, strong voice, the voice Nneka had given him, he read his confession. Does she truly forgive him and start anew? Or has her love already learned to live a full, beautiful life without him? He told the story of the candlelight, the gold earrings, and the woman who was the true architect of his mind. He publicly credited Nneka for every success he had ever had and accepted full responsibility for his cowardice. The village watched in silence. It was a moment of profound humility that turned the tide of their hearts. When he finished, he stepped down and walked to Nneka, handing her the carved slate. He didn't ask for a place in her house. He simply bowed his head. He accepted a humble life beside her as her assistant in the school, with no power, no pride, and no Italian suits. Nneka looked at the man she had once believed in. She saw the sincerity in his eyes and the weight of his repentance. She saw the gift of his public truth. She finally reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture that spoke volumes. But as the sun set over Umui's, the question remained in the air like the scent of rain.